Okay, today's daf we're going to learn is Pesachim Daf Lamed. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbi Freda Cohn in honor of her husband Eric Nussbaum, with much love for an amazing 47-year journey with many more years to go in Yirtzeh Hashem. You are the most wonderful husband and father, and you are a Saba Sababa. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. Our page is Daf Lamed. We're going to start right at the top, but I'm going to do a little bit of review because this connects with what we finished yesterday. So first we saw this whole machloket, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. We had different explanations, if you remember, of understanding Rabbi Yehuda, whether he thinks the simple or the basic reading, and that was Rava's reading, if you remember, was that the Mishnah can't be Rabbi Yehuda because the Mishnah distinguished between chametz of a Jew and chametz of a Gentile that was left over Pesach. And it distinguished, right, a Gentile is permitted, a Jew is forbidden. And that we said can't be Rabbi Yehuda because he seems to say you can't eat any chametz after Pesach either. Doesn't matter Jew or Gentile, which put his opinion as an extreme in one direction. We then saw Rav Acha bar Yaakov, who had an extreme in the other direction, who thought that Rabbi Yehuda actually permits, which was this crazy shita, permits eating chametz on Pesach that belongs to a Gentile. Okay. In any case, we claimed that he changed his mind about that. We proved that. And then we moved on to the topic, and then we have Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon holds that it's not forbidden to eat chametz shavar lava Pesach. It's not forbidden to benefit from Torah law. However, the rabbis instituted a penalty for anyone who kept their chametz over Pesach. We penalized them, and therefore it's going to be forbidden. Now we moved on to what happens if you have chametz either on Pesach or after Pesach, which is then going to connect back to Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon's opinions about whether they get mixed up with other foods. Classic laws in the Gemara, they love discussing ta'arovot. Okay, wait till we get to wives get mixed up and things like that in Yevamot. At this point, we're only talking about food getting mixed up. So food gets mixed up with other foods, and we basically then assume, right, it kind of sounds like the Haftorah this week of the babies getting mixed up, right? And we're not sure which baby's whose. In the Shlomo HaMelech story, if you were in shul, right, it's actually a funny thing, the Haftorah, because we very rarely read it, because Miketz is usually Shabbos Hanukkah, and then we don't read that Haftorah, so it's very rare we even read it. Anyway, it's good Haftorah if you're in shul. So the point is that sometimes things get mixed up, and here the chametz got mixed up with other foods that were permitted, and the question is, what do we do with it on Pesach? What do we do with it if it's after Pesach and it's just chametz shavar lava Pesach? So again, if you hold like Rabbi Shimon, the chametz shavar lava Pesach isn't forbidden by Torah law, then you'll be lenient with a tarovet. It's not a problem. And that's why Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan both say we hold like Rabbi Shimon, and we don't have a problem with chametz that got mixed up after Pesach with other stuff. But what if it's on Pesach? And then we had this distinction about min b'mino, if it's the same type or it gets mixed up in something different. It's always more strict if it's the same type, at least according to Rav and Shmuel, who say that in general, if things get mixed up with the same type, we don't say they can be nullified. If it's different types, we say they can be nullified because there's different tastes operating here, and one will overrule the other and will kind of absorb the other. And then Rav was machmir, though, and he said, even though most isurim in the Torah, we're going to allow them as long as you don't taste it when it's two different types. In this case, on chametz for Pesach, we're going to be strict because of karet, and we're going to forbid it in a min b'she'eno mino, if they're two different types, because maybe you'll accidentally think that min b'mino is allowed, and that's really not allowed. That's asur, what we say b'mashu, even any little bit, and therefore any chametz on Pesach is asur b'mashu. And in fact, we're going to start with that. Amar Rava. Rava at the top of our page says, Hilchata chametz b'zmano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, asur b'mashu kirav. So Rava paskins like Rav about chametz on Pesach, that we're very strict and it's forbidden b'mashu, and this is why we're always crazy, as I said yesterday, about chametz on Pesach, because we paskin like Rav that in any combination, it's going to be forbidden in any amount. But when it comes to, he doesn't paskin like Rav across the board. When it comes to shelo b'zmano, chametz after Pesach, right? Rav wanted to say like Rabbi Yehuda, we're very strict about it because it says lo taseh in the Torah, and therefore it's going to be a problem. Very distinguishes min b'mino, min she'en b'mino, because it doesn't have karet anymore. It's not as strict, so we won't make a gzera, but we will forbid it min b'mino. But both Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, as I said, didn't think this was a problem. They held like Rabbi Shimon, and we're going to say that exactly here. That's how Rava paskins. Shelo b'zmano, bein b'mino, bein shelo b'mino, mutal ki Rabbi Shimon. Okay, they permit it like Rabbi Shimon because Rabbi Shimon doesn't think it's forbidden. Now the Gemara is going to ask, what do you mean it's not forbidden? Rabbi Shimon, it's true. He said, remember, we explained the Mishnah according to Rabbi Shimon. What did our Mishnah say? Chametz shavar alav Pesach of a Jew is forbidden to benefit from. So what do you mean? It's true. It's not by Torah law, but by rabbinic law. And whoever said if something's rabbinic and it mixes up into a combination, it's not a problem. So we say here, Umi amar Rava hachi, did Rava really say it's like Rabbi Shimon? And therefore now we read yesterday in Rashi, if you remember, the last Rashi on the page, when we say like Rabbi Shimon, he said, La'achar zmano share. Okay, I'm now reading 3 lines from the bottom of Rashi on Daf Kaftet Amud Bet. Va'afilu b'notein tam share, even if you taste the chametz in the food, since it's only chametz shavar alav Pesach, which is not forbidden by Torah law, it doesn't matter. Okay, even if you taste it, it's fine. So they say, how could Rava have said this? Bahama Rava, remember Rava from yesterday. How did he explain? He explained that our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Shimon, which means that it's true, it's not forbidden by Torah law, but what did he say? Rabbi Shimon kanasa kanis, ho'il va'avar alav b'bal yareh b'al yamatzeh. Rabbi Shimon said the chametz that was left over Pesach is, if you left it against the law, you're not allowed to leave it. After Pesach, even though by Torah law it's permitted, but the rabbis wanted to penalize you, and therefore it's forbidden. So why would he all of a sudden say, well, if it falls into a mixture, it's okay? It doesn't make any sense to say that Rabbi Shimon would permit it entirely if it doesn't give any taste, any flavor. Even if it gives flavor, why would he permit it? So what do they answer? When the rabbis decided to penalize you, they could decide when to penalize you. So they're going to penalize you if you have a loaf of bread that you left over Pesach on purpose and you didn't care and you said, well, I'm not selling this, right? It's mine. I want to own it. And you keep ownership over it. That we're going to penalize you. But if you're talking about something that was chametz that fell into a mixture of something else, let's say one of those slices of bread got mixed up with all this other bread that you had from after Pesach. And now you have one slice of bread mixed up with all these others and you don't know which is which, then we're not going to worry about that, okay? Or something that, let's say, cooked together with something. That the rabbis didn't go so far as to penalize you in a case like that. And that's why, according to Rabbi Shimon, since it's only a penalty, we're only going to have a penalty when it's actually just that chametz. But if it's mixed up with other things, the rabbis didn't forbid that. Now we're going to say, Va'azda Rava l'ta'ameh. And Rava actually holds l'shitato. Okay, now, what did he hold? Now remember, if he holds that we hold like Rabbi Shimon, about chametz shavar alav Pesach, then we're only going to forbid. Remember what Rava held about Rabbi Yehuda? I said this before. Rava held that according to Rabbi Yehuda, chametz of a Gentile is also forbidden shavar alav Pesach after Pesach, right? Because according to Rava, Rabbi Yehuda didn't make any distinction between chametz of a Gentile and chametz of a Jew. So all of them are forbidden after Pesach. But the fact that Rava paskins not like that, okay, and Rava says, right, I hold like Rabbi Shimon when it comes to chametz after Pesach, right? He's very strict with chametz on Pesach, but after Pesach he's not, because he holds like Rabbi Shimon. So we're going to see this matches something he actually did. And today we're going to see all sorts of instances where rabbis made dispensations for people based on need, it seems like. It's very interesting. That comes up a few times on today's talk. So we're going to see. So Kiavina be Rav Nachman, Rava said that when we were in the house of Rav Nachman, when the 7 days of Pesach were over, Amrlani would say to us, Puku uzvinu chamira de bechela. Go out and buy, now we're going to see, we'll have to fill in the blank exactly, buy the chamira of the Bnei Chela. Bnei Chela sounds like chayalim, soldiers. Some people say it's soldiers, and it's the soldiers would leave bread. They would have bread. These were probably non-Jewish Gentile soldiers, and they had saved bread. Unclear exactly that interpretation. Rashi says, no, Bnei Chela are the Gentiles. Go buy from the Gentiles. Chamira. What's chamira? So Rashi says, look in Rashi, Bnei Chela, okay, it's right on the same line as in the Rashi as in the Gemara. Nochrim af al pisha ofuhu yom zeh she'avar v'hu Pesach. Even if they baked it yesterday when it was Pesach, it's totally fine, because again, if you hold like Rabbi Shimon, then you distinguish between Gentiles chametz and non-Gentiles chametz on Pesach, and Jews chametz on Pesach. Now, there's something strange about this Rashi. It says, afapisha ofuhu, okay? Even if you bake it, even if they baked it. Now, there's a bit of a problem here. They would go buy baked bread from Gentiles, but there's a problem of pat akum, this bread that you can't the law is, not by Torah law, it's definitely rabbinic. The rabbis wanted to distance the Jews from the Gentiles, and one of the things they did was not only their cooked foods, also their breads. There's certain exceptions to the rule. Maybe Rashi is talking about under those exceptions to the rule. Some people say, and this goes back to our whole discussion about sourdough starters, they had to get rid of all their stuff. So imagine if the bread they made was generally made with sourdough starters, so you need to start from scratch after Pesach. It's going to take you a few days till you can bake bread. So what the rabbi said was you can go get from the Gentiles the starters, the seor, and then you can make your bread with that so that you don't have to wait a few days to start from scratch. Again, here's a need. The people have no bread, right? And God forbid they should eat matzah, right, the night after Pesach. We all know how miserable that is to have to eat matzah. Think of my son in the army who was eating matzah and salami or matzah and tuna for like a week after Pesach. But basically, you don't want to make the people suffer so much. And therefore, you're going to basically say that you can go buy those from the Gentiles, right? They allow that. And here you see he's consistent with his approach that he holds like Rabbi Shimon when it comes to chametz after Pesach, and he's lenient. Amarav. Now we're moving into laws of koshering utensils. Okay, so one of the basics of koshering utensils is that we say kibol o kach polto. The way it gets absorbed, there's a concept of that a utensil absorbs the flavor. And not only does it absorb it, the same way it absorbs the flavor, it spits out the flavor. Okay, this is why, I'll just give you some background. If generally you use a pot with water and you boil water in it, then the way you kosher it is by boiling the water, because the way it absorbed it was through hot water being boiled. The way it's going to spit it out is through hot water being boiled, and that's why you could kosher it in that way. If it's a frying pan and you use it with a direct fire, so then you have to basically put direct fire on it. That's what we call libun chamor. It's libun kal and libun chamor. But anyway, then there's an oven, let's say a pizza oven type thing. So again, you'd have to burn a fire inside, because the same way you normally cook in it, that's how it's going to absorb flavor. That's how you're going to get the flavor out. Now the question is, what substances can be kosher? What substances can't be koshered? And what Rav is going to say is a very radical, stringent opinion here. Remember, he was stringent about chametz shavar alav Pesach, right? Whereas the others allowed it, like Rabbi Shimon, he was machmir like Rabbi Yehuda. Here also, he's very stringent. And what does he say? Amarav, if you're stringent about chametz shavar alav Pesach, then this could lead you to another stringency. He says, kterot bepesach yishavru. If you have kli cheres, earthenware vessels, if you remember, earthenware vessels can't be koshered. So what if, right, they also can't be purified. Remember that if they get impure, you have to break them. Shviratan, zohi, taharatan, right? The only way to do it is by breaking it. So likewise, you can't kosher them. So therefore, kterot bepesach, if you have kterot, now it seems to be saying, okay, there might be some other interpretations, but we're going to assume that what he means is you have to break all your earthenware vessels before Pesach. Okay, why? Because what's going to happen? If you use them after Pesach, what will happen? Remember, chametz shavar alav Pesach is forbidden in a ta'arovet, in a mixture, according to him, if it's min bimino, if you cook the same type item in it. So if you're to use that pot after Pesach and you're going to cook the same item in it, what will happen? The chametz in the kli will come out. Now, this chametz was left over Pesach. Now, what does it mean it was left? So first of all, there's no bal yerah, bal yematzeh, because you don't see it. It's in, right? What happened? The flavor of the chametz went into the sides of the kli. So you don't see it. So it's not forbidden bal yerah, bal yematzeh. However, when you go to cook in it after Pesach, you're going to have chametz that was in the pot and it was left all throughout Pesach. You probably never thought about this, right? It was left all over Pesach. And now when you cook in it, the flavor of the chametz comes out. Okay, you never thought of this because we don't paskin this way, so don't worry. But all the flavor comes out. And then the flavor is now in the food, okay? So you now have chametz shavar alav Pesach that was left over Pesach in your pot, okay? If you're like Rabbi Shimon, then it's just a knas. Well, we're not going to institute a knas when there's no bal yerah, bal yematzeh. It's not a problem. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, this will be a problem. So therefore, you have to break them. So now, Amai, the Gemara asks, Lishhinu achara Pesach, v'li'ave behu shalo b'minan. They say, why don't you leave it? Okay, first of all, I just want to point out before I move on, I forgot. Rashi says here, you'd have to say, this is another kashrus issue. In general, we say, no tein tam lifgam, meaning if something gives bad taste, we don't care. Now, why, if something is bad taste, do we not care? Because that's not good taste. What makes something bad taste? Once it's 24 hours old, never used in 24 hours, already the taste will be bad. So you have to say that Rav doesn't hold that noten tam lifgam is allowed, because otherwise this would be a classic case of noten tam lifgam. It gives bad flavor, and therefore it's allowed. So we paskin that that's the case, but Rav obviously didn't paskin that way. Okay, I'm going to answer a few questions. So Becky asked, what about cold food? So that comes up as a question, and they say, oh, you could use it for cold food, but if we let you keep your pot, you're likely going to forget, and you'll end up using it for hot food. Okay, and then there was one other thing I wanted to mention. Right, no, okay, we're going to get to it right now. So now they say, why don't you just leave it after Pesach? And then remember, Rav says, you can't cook something of the same type. It won't be batel. But if you cook something of a different type, it will be nullified, because min b'she'eno mino is batel. It's fine. So why don't we say that? Okay. Before we even get to an answer for that, there's a huge question on this that Tosfot asked, which is, when we talk about nullification, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this recently, I'm sure I didn't mention it recently, but one of the other criteria about bitul, about nullification working, is that ein mevatlin isur lechatchila. You cannot do this with intent, meaning it's only if, right, I get these calls every once in a while, right? My kid accidentally put my dairy this into my fleischach pot, and what am I supposed to do? And right, that's all b'diavad. Then we say, it depends. Was it shishim? Was it that? Then you can already say, okay, it could be nullified if the criteria are there, if all the details are correct. But you can't say, I'm going to pour a little bit of milk into my chillin, see if it, see what happens for an experiment. You can't do that. That's called mivatal isur lechatchila. So how could the Gemara even be suggesting that we should leave it till after Pesach, cook something in it, shelo b'mino, it'll be nullified, and then we'll be fine. That's basically mivatal isur lechatchila. So Tosfot answers a very interesting question. If you look at Tosfot, Dibor matchil lashinu adachar Pesach, v'le'avibu shelo b'minan, the re-answers, 3 lines from the bottom of that Tosfot, Rimefaresh, Tekevan shakderot shel cheres hen, since they're cheres, and they're earthenware, and there's no other way to fix them. What does he say? Im yu asurim ve'en lem takana. If we're going to forbid them, and there won't be any solution, zeh chashuv diavad. What does b'diavad mean? B'diavad means you have no choice, right? B'diavad doesn't always mean it already happened. B'diavad could mean we're in an unideal situation. So this is a non-ideal situation because we're now in a situation where we have no choice but to break the kli. That would already be b'diavad. So that's an interesting way. It's always a question, what makes something b'diavad? This comes up in many sugyot, so it comes up here also. In any case, let's go back to our question. So they say, why don't you leave it till after Pesach and then basically get rid of the isser into something that's mutal, shelo b'minan. So they say, we're worried that maybe you'll cook it b'mino. In other words, it could be also they're suggesting maybe only use that utensil from now on going forward for things that are shelo b'minan. And then they said, well, that, who's going to remember? Just like who's going to remember we can only use it for cold, who's going to remember that we can only use it for shelo b'mino? So now Shmuel says, Shmuel Amar lo yishavu. We don't break them. Okay, Shmuel thinks, which makes sense, like Rabbi Shimon, Chamesh Havar Lava Pesach is not even asur by Torah law. It's just a knas. If it's a knas, a penalty, we certainly don't need to make you break all your pots. Aval mashilu lachar zmano v'avibuhu bein b'mino bein shelo b'mino. You can leave it till after Pesach, and you can use it for anything. V'az de Shmuel l'tameh. Shmuel, we see that he was consistent with his opinion. Now here's a great, great story. Okay, de Amar Shmuel lahanu de mizabne kande. He went out to the people selling brand new pots after Pesach, right? Could you imagine if now he was living in the place of Rav. Okay, we're going to get to that at the end, that's the Gemara is going to ask a question and answer it. I'm giving it away a little bit, but it's important to understand the story. He's living in the community of Rav, and in the community of Rav, they held like Rav and they broke their pots. So you can imagine, right? Just like everybody runs out to buy pizza on, Motzei Pesach or fresh bread. Everybody there was buying new pots because they broke all their pots before Pesach. So they have to go out and buy new pots. So you can imagine the demand is high, right? Therefore, all the prices are going to go up. So all the people who were selling pots for very expensive prices, Shmuel went out, and here you see how the rabbis got involved with the prices in the shuk. And Shmuel got up and he said, the market rates, he got up and he says to them, Ashvu zvine akandaichu, lower your prices now. And he threatens them. And he says, if you don't lower your prices, ilo, if not, darshinu lechu ka Rabbi Shimon. I'm going to teach the halacha like Rabbi Shimon, that you don't need to. Now you have to wonder, people already broke their pots, but I guess maybe he's talking about down the road. Next time, you're not going to sell your pots to anybody because no one's going to break their pots next time, because I'm going to tell everybody that they can hold like Rabbi Shimon, and therefore they don't need to break their pots before Pesach. So the lidrush lahu. So the Gemara asks, why didn't he just simply say like Rabbi Shimon? Why did he only use it as a threat that I'm going to pass like Rabbi Shimon? Because we already know the Hashmuel Rabbi Shimon's sphere. We already know that Shmuel holds like Rabbi Shimon. So why was he only using it as a threat to get them to lower their prices? Why didn't he just do it? So the answer is Atre de Rav Hava. And this is very interesting. We've seen this before. He was in the city of Rav, and when you're in the city of someone who's greater than you, or he was certainly the teacher of the place, you have to hold like that person. However, what was interesting about it is he at least threatened them that he was going to use his position in order to lower the prices. And again, you see this issue of the rabbi seeing a need and saying, there's a financial need here. This is going to be difficult for the people. Right before, it wasn't necessarily financial. It was just, how are they going to have bread after Pesach? Here, there's a financial need, and he saw a need, and he basically got the sellers to lower their prices so that people didn't have to struggle with, these very high prices. Okay, now, moving on. Hahu tanura. We're now going to get into all sorts of kashrus situations. The first issue is going to be a very interesting issue, and in Daf Mishalahem this week of Shir and Chamutal, it's on our site in Hebrew and on our Facebook page, they discuss this issue of milchik bread. If you know this issue of milchik bread, or if you know in Israel, barekasim were always triangle ones are cheese and rectangular ones are potato. And nowadays they became this whole problem. They actually discuss it. It's very interesting because people started getting creative and saying, oh, this is boring. And they started doing all different shapes, and it causes confusion. And the Rabbanut was in a whole uproar about it, because the whole idea is they want people to be able to notice the difference between the chalavi ones and the bisari ones, okay, or parv ones. Okay, so we're going to talk about, are you allowed to make milchik bread? Is that allowed or not? So let's see. So first they start with a tanur de tachu beit tichia. Okay, they took fat from an animal. This is the opposite. This is going to be bisari. They took the fat of an animal and they rubbed, like they, what do you call it, greased the oven before they put, remember, the bread would go directly on the oven. So they greased the oven with animal fat. Asra rava bar ahilai lemechla lerifta afilu b'milcha laolam. Now the assumption is this is a earthenware vessel. Earthenware vessels have no way to kosher them. So he said, you can't eat this bread ever, even with salt, because the bread becomes fleishach. Any bread you're going to make in that oven going forward is going to be meat. And therefore, we're worried, you might eat it with the kutach, remember that disgusting yogurty, moldy bread kind of thing, which was chalavi. And you might eat it, people dip their bread a lot in that kutach. So it was one of these dips that people would eat. So therefore, we're worried you might eat it with dairy, and you won't know that it was cooked in this oven that was meat, and therefore it's a problem forever. There's no solution to this. Meitive. So the Gemara brings a contradiction from the following Tanaitic source. Ein lashinit ha'isa b'chalav. Here we get to milchik bread. You're not allowed to put milk in your dough. Okay, if you do this, don't worry. There are heterim. Okay, one of the heterim is if you're just doing it in your house, or you're doing it, you make the bread in a different shape, or if if you're gonna make it for your house and you're going to eat it right away. Okay, if you listen to Shir and Chamutal, they go into all sorts of interesting halachic nuances about this. Okay, but the basic halacha is, and this is why bakeries generally don't bake dairy bread, and if they do, it looks very different than the other breads, because there has to be some distinguishing mark that everyone knows that it's dairy. So, if you do it, kol hapat kula asura mipnei hergel avera. If you do it, it's forbidden because people will make mistakes. Okay, this goes back to that sugya we saw in Daf Yubet about they made the zman achila, isur achila Pesach earlier because people will confuse the times. Here, people will look at the bread and think that it's a regular loaf of bread, and they won't realize that it's dairy, and they'll eat it with meat, and it will be a problem. I was just in the States recently. My parents were all excited about this Pastrami Challah. Okay, it's challah with pastrami in the middle, and it was this big hit. So that might be different because that's clearly meat. Everybody knows you can see the meat inside. Here we're talking about where it just has meat flavor, which is not identifiable at all, or milk. Milk in a dough, you all know, you won't see the milk. It won't be obvious. Kayotsebo. Similarly, now remember, we're bringing this as a contradiction for that first source. So we're going to have to see. The first source said the meat in the oven, right? You can never make anything in this oven, again, that's bread, because people will think the bread is parv, and it'll turn out the bread is meat. So this is saying you can't do the milchik bread with milk in the dough. That's not yet relevant to our issue. But it continues and it says, Ein tashinit hatanor ba'aliyah. You can't grease the oven with the tail of the lamb or the sheep or one of those animals and, right, rub it around the inside of the oven. V'im tash kol hapat kula asura. So far it sounds the same. Any bread you make in there is going to be a problem. Ad she'asika tatanor. Until, go back to my pizza oven, right? You make a big fire in that pizza oven. It burns everything and you're fine. Oh, that seems to contradict what we just said. Right? It sounds like as long as you light up a big fire, what will happen? Right? The same way you can basically make a big fire and it'll be fine. But we said before, if it's an earthenware oven, there's no solution forever. So, right, here they say, it would be allowed to yufta derava barahale aliyai to yufta. So they say this does sound like a question against him. Amale Ravina le Rav Ashi. So Ravina says to Rav Ashi, "V'chime achardi totiv Rava bar Hilai amaika amar Rav k'derot b'Pesach yishavru." If we just knocked out Rava bar Hilai's issue and we say in earthenware oven, no problem, make a fire inside, it's fine. Well, then why don't we knock out Rav who says break all your pots before Pesach? Sounds like the same thing. Theoretically, you could take out the flavor and moving on, you're totally fine. And Rav seemed to say this is a problem going to be forever because the flavor never, right, the flavor's always going to be coming out, just like in the oven. The oven we said is okay. So we're going to have two different answers. Amrle, hatan tanor shel matechet, hacha b'ktera shel cheres. They never actually said what the tanor was made of. So maybe this Tanaitic source, which says you can't do the aliyah, but if you do and you cook, you make a fire in it after, it's fine. You've gotten out the flavor. You can now bake bread in it. It won't be meat bread. So maybe that's a tanor that was made of metal, a metal oven, where you can easily take the flavor out. But when Rav was talking about the pots, he was talking about a pot of cheres. Maybe it's a difference in the material. Okay, as we said, cheres is going to be a problem for the long term, and matechet can be koshered. A second answer could be both are earthenware. The oven also was earthenware, but there's a big difference. How do you cook in the pizza oven? You put a fire inside, right? When the fire dies down, you end up with coals. Then you put the bread into the same place where the fire was. So think about it. When that fire went in, the fire was on the inside of that oven, and it was able to get all the flavors that were absorbed in the inside of the oven. But if you have a pot, what do you do with your pot? You put it on a flame usually. Now, where's the flame? Or even if you put it in some sort of oven, the heat, whatever heat is getting onto the pot is going to the outside of the pot. That's what it means hesekami bachutz. You light it up on the outside of the pot, which means that when you cook something on the inside, there still could be flavor on the inside that didn't come out by the fire. So you can't kosh it, right? You can't, unless you put the coals inside the pot, which we're going to ask in a second, why don't you do that? It's not going to take out the flavors that are absorbed in the inside of the pot. And that's why the pots have to be broken, because the flavor will come out later. Whereas when it comes to the right, obviously here we're not talking about Pesach anymore in the oven, but it's the same idea. When it comes to the oven, we make a fire inside, and therefore it's going to basically burn out everything inside. So if you want to say, why don't you take your earthenware pot and put the coals inside the pot and then light it up on the inside? Sounds like a great plan, although maybe not really. But no, you're not going to do a very good job because you're going to be worried that it's going to explode. You generally wouldn't put hot coals inside an earthenware vessel. It'll break the vessel. So therefore, either it will break the vessel, or you're just not going to do a good job because you're worried it's going to break the vessel, and therefore it's a problem, right? You're not going to do it well, and therefore this doesn't work. Hilkach. Therefore, they come to another halachic conclusion. This is a very practical daf, okay? So, Hai buchya hesekomi bachutzu ve'asul. So therefore, this buchya, okay, what's a buchya? A buchya seems to be a griddle, okay? A griddle is different than a pot. A pot has sides to it, and that's what we're worried about. What about a griddle? A griddle is flat. But even though a griddle's flat, they still say, hesekomi bachutzu ve'asul. Still a griddle, the heat is underneath and the food goes on top, even though it's flat and you don't have the sides, but you still have the bottom of the pan, right? And the bottom of the pan doesn't come in direct contact with the fire. But if you were to put coals on top of the griddle, which they're not as worried it's going to crack because it's not the same kind of shape as a pot that would crack, you could theoretically do what we call libun chamor, put the coals inside the top of the griddle, and that would resolve your kashrus issue, right? Let's say it was meat in there, then you could bake, bread, or I don't know what you're making in a frying pan, but whatever you're right, you could theoretically make pitot in there or lafas, something like that. So that would work. More kashrus related questions. Amale Ravina le Rav Ashi. Hane sakine bepischa hechi avdinan lehu. What do we do about knives on Pesach? Now the assumption is there's knives that are used. Now, again, let's just go back. Kibble o kach polto. The way you use it is the way you have to kasher it. So if you have knives, sometimes you might mix something with a knife. So you'll put it in a pot, let's say with boiling water. Sometimes you could take a knife and use it as a skewer and burn something directly on the fire. So therefore, it has both elements to it. Both it goes directly on the fire and it goes in boiling water. So the question is, can we kasher them and how? Amar le lididi chadetaka avdinan. So Rav Ashi says to him, what I do is I buy new knives. Amar le tinach mar de efshale to lo efshale mai. Okay, Becky, this is exactly what you just asked. Sorry, I'm not following all the chats, but I just noticed that. I'll get back to all the questions later. I can't follow them all while I'm teaching. But anyway, he says, okay, you can afford it, but what about people who can't afford to throw away their knives and buy new knives all the time? So Amar le, and it's an interesting way of reading this, what he says to him, Ana ke'en chadetakamina. What I meant was you make them like new. I didn't mean you go out and buy new ones. Now, whether he really didn't mean it the first time and he's just adjusting it now, or maybe he really did mean this from the start, we don't really know. But he says what I really meant was make them like new. How do you do that? Katayu betina, you cover the handle with dirt so that when you burn it with a flame, it doesn't get ruined. Parzilayu benura, you take the metal part and you burn it with a fire, direct fire. The hadra ma'ilana lekatayu berotchin. And then, since when you mix it, sometimes the handle gets in the hot water, then you have to boil the whole thing. You take off whatever covering you put on the handle, and now you boil the whole thing in hot water. But in fact, the halacha is, but in fact, we don't paskin that way. We paskin that you can just put it in boiling water. You don't have to worry that maybe on the off chance it was used as a shipud. Okay, it seems you don't have to worry about that. You can put it in boiling water and in a kli rishon. Now, there's a debate. What do we mean by kli rishon? Kli rishon generally means the pot that had the water boiled in it from the start. But it's not clear. There's two options always in kli rishon. There's kli rishon, we learned this in Shabbat, there's kli rishon that's on the fire, and there's kli rishon that was taken off the fire. Now, we all know that when we kasher, it's on the fire. It's boiling as we do it. But some people think the kli rishon here means as long as it's in the kli where the water was boiled, even if the fire is no longer underneath it. Okay, we don't hold that way, but some people explain the Gemara this way. Amar Rav Huna Bered Rav Yoshua, eitz parur. What if you have a wooden ladle? What do you do with that? So again, it goes into boiling water generally. Magilo berotchin ubekli rishon. Kasavar kibalo kach poto. Because he says, right, you kasher it the same way it absorbed. How did it absorb? It was in boiling water. That's how it's going to come out. So now they ask a memar the following question. Hane mane de kunya. We already know that klecheres absorbs, very absorbent, and it will come out for the long term. So now, what if it's glazed? Okay, now they're going to talk about different types of glazed. It's not clear whether some people say it's covered with some sort of lead. Some people say it's glass. Not exactly clear what these coverings are. Obviously, they knew what they were, and you'll see they're going to distinguish between green ones and black and white ones. Okay, there's two different categories, and there's a difference in the absorbency of each. Yeruka lo tibayalach devadaya series. So now they're basically explaining the question. What is he talking about? What they want to know is, can we use it on Pesach? Because if it doesn't absorb, then maybe you can use it on Pesach, even if you used it during the year. So the green ones, of course, are forbidden because those are absorbent, even though, right, remember, it's cheres underneath with this green covering. We're going to assume, again, maybe a green glass. The green glass is absorbent. Ki tibayalach, your question must be, ukame v'chivare mai. And even with that, we're going to distinguish. Okay, ukame and chivare are black and white. If there's ridges, then of course it's going to be a problem because things get stuck in the ridges. Of course, that's going to be forbidden. Your question must be, if they're smooth. The surface is smooth of the black and white glaze over the earthenware vessel. Is it absorbent or is it not? Says we see that when you cook something in it, it gets wet on the outside of the utensil. So what does that show? They said it must show that it gets absorbed in and comes out the other side. So it must be that they absorb. Since they absorb, it must be that they're going to be forbidden also. And the Torah said kli cheres can never be kashered. So therefore, these are going to be problematic. Now they ask, says, wait a minute. Why is this any different than yain nesach? Yain nesach is wine that the non-Jews used, right? And there's a concern that they offered it up to their gods, and the rabbis forbade that, right? It's like kind of like avodah zarah, and also whatever the whole big issue of yain nesach. We're not going to get into that right now. Also, they didn't want us drinking with Gentiles. So anyway, they say that's permitted if you had wine that was yain nesach that's forbidden, and it was for a long time. Let's say it was in these jugs that were whether glazed, white, black, or green. It's all permitted. Okay, what you have to know is that yain nesach that's in kli cheres, earthenware vessel, makes the earthenware vessel problematic because again, there's this assumption the earthenware vessel is very absorbent. Even though you're not cooking it, it will absorb it. Okay, so because you probably are thinking, what are you talking about? Isn't kashrut, right? Things generally transfer through heat. This isn't heat, but if you leave it in there long enough, it will be absorbed into the earthenware vessel, and it's a problem because the assumption is the next time you put wine in there, kosher wine, the other wine flavor will get into that wine. So now they say, maybe you'll suggest, oh, yain nesach is only rabbinic in nature. It never says in the Torah you can't. And chametz is deoraita. Therefore, we'll be more strict with chametz. And therefore, the white, the green, the white, the black, the green, all of them are going to be forbidden. But when it comes to yain nesach, no. But that can't possibly be because kol detikun rabbanan kein deoraita tikun. The rabbi said this is forbidden. And they say generally this could be absorbed. It's going to be the same. The laws are all the same. You can't just start saying, oh, we're going to assume this kli absorbs only deoraitas. It doesn't absorb derabbanans. We don't do it like that. No, once it's asur, it's forbidden. It's forbidden. So what do they answer? Amar le, zeh tashmishol yedei chamin, zeh tashmishol yedei tzonen. Even though kli cheres is generally absorbent, if it's glazed, then we're not worried it's going to absorb, only though when it's something cold inside. Because again, without heat, it's not going to be absorbed. So it might be absorbed if you don't have the glaze covering over it. But if it has this glaze covering, it won't get absorbed unless you apply heat. And that's why there's a distinction between the wine versus the chametz. Okay, moving on. Amar Rava bar Abba, Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi, Amar Shmuel. Kol akelim shenishtamshu behem chametz betzonen, mishtamesh behem matzah. If you have, okay, most people don't do this, but if you have utensils that were used only with cold, you can use them on Pesach also, okay? Even though they were used with chametz, it's fine. Chutz min, there's just a few exceptions. First he gives one, then they're going to say a few more. Chutz min beit se'or ho'il shechimutzo kasher. They had a special utensil where they would allow the sourdough mixture to basically turn into a starter. And there you would leave it for a while. Rashi says sometimes you would leave it even overnight. Beit se'or and Rashi says 3-4 lines before it says matnitin in big letters. Where she leaves it to sit there for a while. V'notanto b'isa, and then she puts it in the dough. Upamim shishoha sham balayla, and sometimes it's left overnight. So because it's there for a long time, and because the Gemara says klimutzo kashe, there's a chemical process going on. So there's this assumption that it's going to be absorbed into the utensil. Where they pickled things also, right? If you put vinegar in, it's the same thing. You're going to have a chemical reaction, and that's also going to cause things to get absorbed into the kli more. So it'll be a problem. Amarava, hane agne de mechoza. These big bowls they use for kneading the dough in mechoza, ho'il utadire lemelesh bu'chamira, because they kneaded the dough in there, umashu bu'chamira, and they would leave it to sit in there. It's just like the Beit Zor. So we started with the Beit Zor. We said also the Beit Charoset, which is where they pickled things or spiced things. And also then we said the bowl where they kneaded the dough and they left it also to rise. So the Gemara says, Pshita, wait, the third one is just like the Beit Zor. What's the difference? Why? What are you adding? You might have thought that these bowls are much wider than the other utensil that they were using for the sourdough starter. This was a much wider bowl that they would use for kneading, and therefore maybe you'd think there's a lot of surface air, and therefore it wouldn't necessarily be absorbed as much. Kamash Malan comes to teach you that no, it's a problem also. Okay, new Mishnah. We'll start this Mishnah and a little bit of the Gemara, and then we'll stop here for today. Nochri shehuvat Yisrael lachemso achar Pesach mutar b'hana'ah. What does this mean? I lend you money and you give me something as collateral. Okay, so if I'm a Jew, I give, let's say I borrow money from a Gentile, and I gave the Gentile chametz as collateral, and the Gentile had the chametz in his possession as my collateral over Pesach. So that's the first part. Mutar b'hana'ah. After Pesach, that chametz is allowed because it was in the possession of the Gentile. But Yisrael shaval anochui, if I lent money to a Gentile and they gave me chametz as collateral, achara Pesach asur b'hana'ah, I can't benefit from that chametz after Pesach. Itmar. Now they're going to bring in the Gemara a machloket, and we'll have to see how this connects to the Mishnah later. Bal chov. Let's say I'm owed money, and let's say someone owes me money, and I have something as collateral. Now the question is, let's say they don't pay me back the money when it's time to pay back the money, and I keep their, let's say it's a watch. I keep their watch as collateral, right? Because as in lieu of the loan. So the question is, when does the watch become mine? So Abai Amar Lemafreyahu Goveh. When I keep that watch because you didn't pay me back the money, the watch becomes mine from the first moment you gave it to me. Even though at that point it was only a collateral, becomes mine from that very first moment. Rava says, no. From the moment you're supposed to pay me back and you don't pay me back, at that point it becomes mine, not before that. Okay, we're going to get more into this tomorrow, so we'll stop here and have a great day, everybody.